this video, we are talking about seller agency. Again, an introduction to seller agency. By no means is this video going to make you an expert, but it should give you the confidence to get out there and continue to learn and work with sellers and start getting listings for sale. So this is going to be a little bit of a longer presentation. I'm going to try to move through it fairly quickly. Again, it's an introduction. There's so much to learn about seller agency. We couldn't possibly teach you in a 20-minute, 30-minute, or even an hour video. So I'm going to do my best to keep this short, but keep it meaningful so you can get out there and feel comfortable working with some sellers. The first thing you need to do is farm for listings. You can't be a seller's agent if you don't have anything to sell. So what are you going to do to find a seller? Your sphere of influence. Guys, we've talked about the sphere of influence many, many times. The importance of your sphere of influence, your neighbors, friends, family, your past buyers or renters. And obviously, if they're a past buyer, they may have bought something and they're potentially going to want to upgrade and sell that. If they're a renter, maybe they've bought something with someone else. You missed the opportunity, but maybe you can get them to sell with you. Or maybe they know somebody, their parents, their friends, something. We've had people who were living in Newton that rented in Boston but need to sell their Newton house. So yes, the renters can be part of your sphere of influence. You can search what they call expired listings. Maybe they were expired because they weren't priced properly. They didn't have the correct marketing. The photos weren't very good. The description wasn't good. The other agent was difficult to work with and with restricted showings. There's a lot you can find out. Expired listings are something you can find in MLS. You can also use Mojo. We've talked about Mojo many times. There's some videos on farming in Mojo. You should watch those. But expired listings, as well as for sale by owner listings represented with no agent, you can go after those. Mojo allows you to actually farm specifically for expired and FSBO listings. It goes out and finds FSBOs for you, for sale by owner listings. I do want to make one thing very clear. You cannot farm listings that are listed by another agent. If it's listed by an agent, it is under contract, it is against the Realtor Code of Ethics, and I'm pretty sure legally speaking, it's illegal to go after that listing and market to the seller. If it's part of a general mailing campaign, in other words, you send 100 postcards out to 100 people in a building, that's okay. But if you're targeting that particular person, you need to be aware of it, and you're supposed to know that if it's listed, if it's actively marketed within reason, for example, if it's in MLS, you should know that it's listed. You should not be soliciting that seller. But otherwise, expired and FSBOs, we know they wanted to sell. We know they didn't sell. That's why we're going after them. FSBOs are properties listed. It's important to understand that properties listed with an agent typically sell for 10 to 15% more than properties listed directly by the owner. Now, we charge, when we cooperate with another company, a 5% broker fee in total. 5% is less than 10 to 15%, meaning we are a net gain for the seller. It's important to understand that fact. We're experts in negotiating. We're experts in marketing. We'll increase their exposure. We'll increase the buyer opportunity, meaning we're going to get them more money. So it's a complete fallacy to think that we will cost them money or somehow they'll make less. It is without a doubt more profitable in almost every situation for the seller to work with an agent. More exposure, more showings, better negotiating strategies, and so forth. One of the first things you need to do before you go to the listing or before you even meet with the seller is know what it's worth. In RPR, we have something called the Realtor Valuation Model. It allows us to adjust the price based on work done to the unit, improvements done. It's a very simple form. As a listing agent, you've got to be NAR RPR, the National Association of Realtors Realtor Property Resource, the RVM, the Realtor Valuation Model. It's one of two valuation models they offer. It's a very simple valuation model. It's great. The date and the cost of any renovations are included. They give us very simple guidelines for adjusting that. RPR has its own training program, so you definitely want to look into that, but it's an incredibly valuable tool. It's free for us as realtors. It's included with your dues. It's a great tool for when you're going to list properties and creating these listing reports. Adjust the price based on your opinion compared to other listings. In other words, you could go find comparables and then you can say which one you think is better. As an agent, hopefully you've seen these properties or are familiar with these properties at the very least. It gives you the ability to have some input as to, based on your experience, what you think is a better property, since a computer will never be able to keep up with all the different variables we look at. So the other thing you can compare is called the comparative market analysis. This is where you're going to select comparative properties. So whereas a realtor valuation, it goes out and finds a handful of comparables that it sees. And it is a very speedy approach. It's a little bit slower. It's still very quick. You can do both of these valuations in about 20 minutes. But you need to go out, you'll select comparative properties by doing a search around the property that you're looking to get a valuation on. And then you're going to, again, go back and adjust the price based on your opinion of the comparison between the properties. Is one newer? Is one older? And so just with a simple slide rule, it allows you to go through and adjust that pricing. When you get those pricing, we're going to start by saying keep that to yourself, because now we're going to talk about the listing presentation. Once you give a price to that seller or that potential seller, everything else you tell them is probably going to go out in one ear and out the other. You need to tell them about your value first and then get into the pricing strategy, okay? That's really fundamental in listing properties. Listing presentation, first thing you need to do is have the agency disclosure signed, right? The mandatory Massachusetts licensee consumer relationship disclosure. You all are becoming incredibly familiar with that form. Remember, it needs to be signed at the first face-to-face meeting where the specific property is discussed. So if you're going to meet with the seller and you're going to discuss the seller's property, you need to sign this before you discuss about discuss that property. Now, you do not need to start the conversation as the seller's agent. In fact, you're not. You're a facilitator at that point. You're there to discuss their property with them and discuss if you are the right fit to be the seller agent. So what we suggest you do is have them sign a facilitator disclosure. So remember, there's 3 options as far as an agency relationship. You can be a buyer agent, a seller agent, or a facilitator. Start as the facilitator. Make them sign that as a facilitator. You can discuss their property, discuss your strategies. If they decide they want to hire you as the seller agent, then you can move up to seller agency. That's really important, because if you don't get that listing and you've gone ahead and started as the seller agent, every buyer you work with, you need to represent yourself as a seller's agent. You're breaking the law by not representing your true position. And you may have to have both the buyer and the seller sign a dual agency agreement. So start as a facilitator. That's the first step. Remember, you cannot move from seller to facilitator. That is not okay. You can only move from facilitator to seller agent or from facilitator to buyer agent. That is the only movement allowed. Okay? Very important to understand that. By the way, if you sign as a facilitator agent, I've often found that the seller is much less anxious about signing. Oh, you're just facilitating, no problem. They don't read that. They're just the name seller agent. It makes this imply that they've hired you. We want them to hire us. We want them to feel comfortable working with us, and that can just get us past that initial signing of this disclosure. Usually not, but this disclosure can be a little contentious. So starting as a facilitator can certainly smooth that over. So once you sign that, we're going to get into what you want to do in the listing presentation. Again, we have a great listing presentation. You can take that, you can modify it, you can come up with your own, but you need to have a presentation when you go meet with potential sellers. You want to talk about your marketing strategy, of course. What are you going to do differently from others? Are you going to create a buyer mailing list? Maybe you're going to buy one. Maybe you have a large buyer mailing list that you're going to send out information to. Are you going to create a property website? And what's that property website going to look like? In our office, it's very easy for us to create a property website. We create a landing page. It looks great. Put all the information on there, and then we buy a domain name. Very simple to create a property website. Be creative with this. There's all sorts of things you can do to market the property. We've got all sorts of different strategies for marketing a property, but you want to be able to have in the presentation a really good understanding of what you can offer them, why there's value in working with you. Some of the things we're doing, for example, 360-degree video tours. Remember, you can take a virtual tour through that. So buyers, maybe they're investors overseas, or maybe they're relocating. It's a great way for them to see the property, the 360-degree tours. While that is becoming more and more popular, at least at the time of this video, we're one of the few companies that are doing it consistently on our sales listings. So, we take some pride in that. We've got a great platform for it. It makes us kind of stick out from the competition. We also do professional photos and so forth, floor plans. We do 360 videos on occasion for the right properties. You also may want to talk about what you're doing that is similar. In other words, buyers or sellers don't want to just hear about what you're going to do that's unique. They need to you don't tell them that you're going to do all the basic stuff, they may not think it's going to happen. I've actually heard reviews or situations where people have not listed with someone because they told them all about these great and wonderful new ideas that they've been using and that have been successful. The seller really just wanted to make sure it was an MLS. So don't forget to tell them it's going to be an MLS. Don't forget to tell them that you're going to do open houses, that you're going to prepare beauty sheets, do a neighborhood mailer, just listed, just sold announcements. By the way, those are incredibly important for building and marketing yourself and generating more listings and farming for more listings. Want to say it again, it bears repeating. You can't be a seller's agent if you don't have property to sell. If you don't have property to sell, if you're not farming for it. So you got to get out there and you got to get yourself some listings. So that's fundamental. Of course, signs. Now, in condominiums, signs are not always something that we can do. Many condominium buildings don't allow them. So you may want to have that conversation, or you definitely want to have that conversation with the seller beforehand and make sure that we can put a sign up. If we can, of course, we will. Then we get in. Once we've kind of got them on the hook, they know who we are. And, I'm going to back up for a second. Don't forget to sell yourself in the listing presentation. Make sure they know who you are. You can create a slide in your presentation that talks about your past experience. Even if, as an experienced rental agent, you can say, I've helped 300 people find new homes in the last 2 years, right? That's true. You help them rent apartments. So you've got a history of placing people. You know how to work with people. You have a sphere of influence of over 1,000 people, whatever the case may be. Talk about that experience. If you've taken or as you continue to take more training and classes in sales, promote yourself. Are you a specialist in residential sales? Are you a certified luxury home marketing specialist? Whatever the case is, you need to promote yourself. Let them know that you're qualified to do this, right? So once you've hit those things, now you can talk about valuation. You're going to want to review the CMA and the RVM with them. Again, you've got their attention. Now we get the price. The comparable market analysis and the realtor value model, those are going to give probably slightly conflicting but similar price points, and they're going to help you create that discussion. It also shows the seller that you're not just relying on one source and one pricing model, but you've looked at this from different angles. Explain your rationale. The more you can explain your reasoning, the better you're going to be able to get them to understand what your perspective is, but also that you've looked at this pragmatically and that you're giving them some serious consideration. You may want to discuss potential marketing improvements, right? What can be done to the property to make it more valuable? Maybe getting a coat of paint on is important. Certainly getting those light bulbs working and getting those cabinet doors screwed in and door knot latches fixed. We talk about that in our 10 fixes we'll get to. And then give the price. Remember that you think they should list for. By the way, don't forget to ask them a few questions along the way. Like, what do they think their property's worth? What properties have they seen that they're comparing their home to? Be prepared for those. If they say, oh, my neighbor just sold their house for $10 million, my house is obviously worth $12 million. You need to understand why they think that. And then you can intelligently discuss that with them. Probably remind them that their place isn't worth $2 million more just because it's their place. It's important to understand what they're thinking so you can work with what they're thinking. By the way, so true with buyers. Understand what they're thinking and then be able to work with what they're thinking. So important to ask before you tell. Okay. If you give a price first, everything else you discuss will be ignored. If you give a price first without asking what they think their home is worth, then they won't really listen. If it's far off from what they're thinking, they may not give you another chance to explain it. They may just hear it's too different and move on. Whereas you could have taken their price, discussed it with them, talked about your pricing valuation, and then come to an agreement. All right, so once you've got them on the hook and they're ready to sell at a price that you think is reasonable, we don't necessarily want to take listings just because we can. We want to make sure we're taking listings that we can sell. We need to sign the contract. Remember, the contract is a commitment for them to move forward with the sale, provided the terms of their commitment provided they're happy with the offer that's presented to them. They do not need to sell at any point, but it is a commitment. We want to stress that it's a commitment for them to move forward with the sale and the marketing of the property. The form we use is an exclusive right to sell with variable rate commission and consent to dual agency that's found in ZIP forms. Again, the variable rate commission, meaning we typically charge 4% if we're the exclusive agency or brokerage in the transaction. So if Boston's Luxury Properties is the only company being involved, then we will discount our commission by 1%. In a dual agency in a situation where there's a cooperating brokerage, maybe we have the listing and they brought the buyer, then we're going to charge 5% and give the buyer's agent or the buyer's brokerage 2.5% and split that 5% with them. That is our commission. It's very important to understand that's what we charge. Never use the words like the standard rate or the market commission, because that's called price fixing and it can be a violation of federal law. So this is what we charge. We don't know what other people charge, or we can't control what other people charge. It's just what we charge. And then of course you want the consent to dual agency, so that if someone in our office has a buyer, we can represent both sides of the transaction like we discussed. Remember, you still have to give that notice of dual agency if that situation arises. This is just the consent. They allow us to represent them in a dual agency. We still have to notify them when we are representing them in a dual agency situation. All right. In the exclusive right to sell, BLP acts as a broker who is due commission if the buyer is found during the term of the agreement. This is regardless if we bring the buyer or not. This protects us from the seller going out and finding out that their neighbor or their cousin wants to buy the place, and they just simply go ahead with that and don't include us. It also, from those unscrupulous buyer agents who think they can go around us, they might just try and find the buyer directly, contact the seller directly, and go around us. This is our protection, so we need to have that exclusive right to sell. Just a reminder also on dual agency, if a buyer comes to us and we don't have a pre-existing buyer relationship, and they want to see this particular property that you're listing, that does not mean that you have to become a dual agent. You can have that buyer sign and notify them that you're a seller's agent, right? Just because they're signing it with you doesn't mean that you're representing them. So it may be that you have a buyer come in, the buyer wants to look at that particular property. You simply have them sign the MMLCRD as the selling agent or the seller's agent. A lot of times in that situation, I recommend writing the address of the property that the document is for on the document. That way, if the buyer doesn't want to buy that property, you can have a sign a buyer agency agreement with us that excludes this listed property, and then start showing them other properties as a buyer agent. All right, preparing to list. We've talked about a little bit about the 10 fixes before, but that's making the place more marketable. Some basic things: you want to declutter the home, or have the seller declutter the home, have them make some basic repairs. Tell them to go download this 10 fixes brochure. You can email it to them. It's in our BLP share. It's a great tip. It's 10 things they can do to make sure that they maximize their profit and that the buyers don't nitpick or find fault with the property and potentially brings lower offers. We may want to, ahead of time, if it's a condominium, get the condo docs, the financials, and the budget together so that when you get an offer on the property, you have them. We talk about this in the introductory video. We certainly stress it in the buyer video, the buyer agency video. Condo docs, financials, and review of the budget or meeting minutes as well are kind of fundamental if you're buying a condominium. And so you definitely want to make sure you have those ready so you can get them to the buyer quickly. Make sure if you've got a property that's not brand new, maybe 5 years old or more, you may want to have a home inspection done in advance, something that you can share with potential buyers. That way, if a buyer wants to make an offer but is thinking they need to do a home inspection, we can share that home inspection. They can decide if they want to use that information or not, and potentially waive the right or the need for a home inspection. I like to do these when I expect multiple offers, and I tend to find it helps speed along the process and encourages a multiple offer situation. You want to make sure that you have a big pre-qualification for the property. In other words, you can get the property viewed by a bank and make them the preferred lender. That way, if a buyer is pre-qualified and they've been reviewed, or I should say if they've been pre-approved by a bank and the property's been pre-qualified by the bank, there's no need for financing contingency. They basically have already, it's not quite the same thing, but they basically almost have a pre-approval. They really just need an appraisal on the property, and then the loan should not be an issue. It really serves to help a buyer who does need to get financing, is very confident in their ability to get financing, know that the property's probably not going to have any issues getting financing. To understand that a little better, the financing is based on whether or not the property meets the bank's requirements and the buyer meets the bank's requirements. If those two requirements are met, then there should be no issue with the loan. By getting the pre-qualification for the property with the lender, you're saying the property meets the lender's approval. The buyer hopefully has done their due diligence. They've met a lender's approval. It's likely there shouldn't be an issue. Again, it might be a way to waive a mortgage contingency. If there's any leases or tenants in place in an investment property, you certainly want to have those in hand, especially if the potential buyer might want to own or occupy. They probably want to know whether or not what the terms of those leases are, and if they, how soon that person can be out. If it's an investor, they're going to want to know what those terms are and make sure that the property is profitable. All right, so when we're preparing for the marketing, we want to get photos and floor plans. That seems pretty obvious. We want to have a flyer, a mailer, and beauty sheet pulled together for the property. We want to get the seller lead paint disclosure signed. To recall, the lead paint transfer notice certification needs to be signed by the seller and needs to be included in the MLS listing because the buyer needs to be able to review it prior to making the offer. All right, very important that that's done when you list the property in preparing the home for marketing. This is not a document that should be signed after an offer is being reviewed. That means you've not done it correctly. This document must be signed by the seller prior to listing the property. There's a form called the seller disclosure. That's where the seller can list all their known issues with the property. Massachusetts is not a full disclosure state. However, this is a place that limits liability for the seller and the seller's agent. The seller gives notice of what they know to be issues. It's a pretty detailed document. It's all pre-formed. All they have to do is spend about 15 minutes going through it, checking off and writing up any descriptions on issues that they may be aware of. So I highly recommend having the seller disclosure signed. Certainly protects ourselves, but also protects the seller. Done in conjunction with the pre-listing home inspection that the seller's going to have paid for and done, that'll help assure the buyer that they know what they're getting. Again, can help encourage multiple offers because they're going in knowing everything about the property. Their buyers going in knowing everything about the property that might come up and be able to just maximize their offer. When you go to list the property, you want to make sure you enter it into MLS. You want to, as long as you have that MLS listing agreement, you want to syndicate the listing. Make sure you keep a list of where. And what that means is put in Realtor.com, Zillow, Trulia, create a page on our website for it. There's plenty of other places to list it, but keep a list of where you're marketing it online. Very important. You're going to want to create a broker tour. That's kind of like a preview. Typically, these are done on Wednesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays around lunchtime, but do it whenever you want, whatever works for you. But you do want to try and get that broker community there. Sometimes lunches are served, so that the brokers can come in, grab a sandwich, and go to the next place. Then you're going to want to schedule an open house. If you're going to, if it's hot property that you think is going to have multiple offers and lots of interest, you want to have multiple open houses like Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or Thursday, Friday, Saturday, or whatever the case may be. You may want to have multiple open houses so you can get that interest together. If it's a listing you think might have multiple offers on it, have a lot of interest, you need to have a strategy for handling those offers. That means that you may want to put in MLS a date that offers are due by. So there's two strategies for handling offers, really. Looking at them when they come in and presenting to the seller as they come in. And under the Realtor Code of Ethics as well as state law, you have to present those offers as they come in unless you have a different set of instructions from the seller. That's where this conversation comes into play. The second option is to have that conversation with the seller and set a specific date and time when offers are being reviewed. We call that a call for offers, or a call for a specific date and time that offers are due by. And that lets the buyers know that that's the date that you, with the seller's consent, have established to review those offers. If you're expecting a lot of offers, it does help put some organization around it and simplify, so that it's not quite as chaotic. If you're not necessarily sure, you can always have that conversation, or I should say, you can have that conversation with the seller and discuss potentially a hybrid of allowing offers to come in as they need to. But once you decide that you've received enough offers, you may add into MLS and make sure everyone that you have contact information for who's seen the property knows that we're actually going to have a call for offers and set a date and time when they're going to be reviewed. In a lot of cases, if an offer came in, that might mean it has to be rewritten to meet the expiration date. In other words, offers have an expiration date on them. They need to be to allow for that call for offers date to come and go so that it's still a valid offer when it's being reviewed. You can't review an offer that's not valid. There's no point looking at it. Hopefully that's clear. I know it's a little tricky, but again, this is an introductory. There's a lot of kind of complicated issues that we're glossing over or giving a brief overview in, but this is a good, again, just trying to get your hands around what it's like to be a seller's agent. All right, at open houses and showings, you want to prepare the seller in advance, right? Remove medicines and valuables. You know, if they have drugs, especially this day and age, get those drugs out of the medicine cabinets. Get the valuables out of the way. Take them out of the house. You know, just keep it simple. Take them out of the house. Have them take them with them. Put them in their trunk. Do something with them. But you don't want them in the house. Their house has suddenly become a public venue for all intents and purposes. While we have some limited control, we really don't have control over who's coming and going during these open houses. House showings will be scheduled and how many. This is a conversation you need to have with your seller in advance. Are there days and times that are not okay? Are there days and times that are preferred? And again, depending on the situation of the seller, they may have kids, they may only want daytime showings, they may work from home and need you to be, where they can be out of the house in the evenings. There's all sorts of different options here. So that's a conversation you got to have in advance. Talk about you need to prepare Globe and Herald ads. Newspapers are still an important part of the marketing. You may want to consider having a party on the property, especially if there's a special situation. But broker parties, broker receptions, or really past customers and getting people there, it's a nice way to get a buzz around a property, especially something special. I wouldn't typically consider this for something that's a smaller property or less significant because it won't receive that much attention. But if you have something special, this is a great way to bring some attention to that property. Think about making the place stand out a little bit. You certainly want to have nice signs, but think about flowers in the space. They help to freshen up especially the dining room, the kitchens. They can really help bring some life in there. Cookies in the kitchens, especially the scent of cooked baking cookies, that can make the place feel like home. Big thing is make the property stand out and be noticed. Make it feel like home for the buyer. That's what our goal is. We want to sell the house. We want to represent the house. We want to create an emotional connection. Now, while we're doing this, we do want to make sure we keep the seller up to date with what we're doing. So we require, Boston Luxury Properties requires that you create a weekly market activity report for the seller. This is really just simply a list of all the showings with maybe some minimal feedback. It's a pretty simple ledger, just gives the seller an idea. If you did an open house, how many people attended, what the responses might have been. We're not giving the seller the names or contact information of the brokers or those potential buyers. We're simply giving them a list of number of people that have come and what the typical feedback has been. Why is this so important? Because if you got a property with a lot of interest, a lot of people coming, but no offers, it's a really good sign the property is overpriced. Showing that data to the seller may help us discuss pricing. If you haven't had that much interest and you don't have a buyer, there could be a number of issues involved. Price may certainly be one of them. Could be timing. It could be other issues. So having that data of how many people came and what the typical feedback has been is going to allow you to have those conversations. You also want to be keeping track of the comparables and what's come on the market and off the market. Don't forget to go out and see those properties. See what makes them different from the properties you're listing. Being a good listing agent means knowing what your competition is up to. You may have to, again, off those comparables, you may change your valuation. I've changed valuations up and I've changed them down. Sometimes a higher price point is called for. So, you need to be keeping an eye on what the comparables are and adjusting accordingly. I jumped ahead and talked about showing reports already. And don't forget to get that feedback, especially from the buyers and agent feedback. And then the open house sign-in. All right, so reviewing, presenting offers. You need to be able to understand and discuss the offer. Price is a huge point. It's not the only point, but it's a huge point. Time frames, when the purchase and sale is being signed, if there's an inspection, how quickly the closing dates are. We need to understand those time frames. Financing, if there's a financing, how much is the financing for? Is it for 50% of the purchase price? That's considered a pretty small loan to value ratio. If it's 80 or 90, 95% of the value, loan to value ratio, you need to be able to understand that some of those might cross a threshold where they're not that strong of an offer. There's a high probability that deal might not come together, right? So the less money being borrowed, or the lower the percentage of the money being borrowed, or the higher the percentage of the money being paid cash by the buyer, the better the deal. More likely the closing is to take place. Need to be able to understand and review any other contingencies. So you'll learn a lot of this over time, but you should be prepared, and be part of being a good listing agent, be able to understand the different contingencies and how they affect the offer. If you're a listing agent, be prepared for buyer cover pages. Have the buyer, don't shy away from letting the buyer's agent or the buyer depict themselves or describe themselves. With one caveat, don't include photos. Have them describe themselves. This is for their family. That's fine, but we don't want to include photos because photos can create a discriminatory issue. You have to be careful of that one. Names on occasion can, if they're particularly ethnic names, that might be, and their offer isn't accepted. You got to be careful. Some crazy stuff out there may be basis for a discrimination issue. So while letters are okay, be careful of what those letters contain. We want to make sure we don't depict it as discriminatory, or that the seller may be put into a position where they're depicted as discriminatory. Buyer agent presentations. This is where the buyer agent wants to present to the seller the property. Now, this is a conversation to have with the seller. Make sure that if the seller's okay with it, the buyer has the right to participate in the presentation of the offer. That doesn't mean they have the right to present the offer. However, as a listing agent, I've got no problem if the buyer's agent wants to participate, maybe wants to describe and present their buyer to the seller. I don't mind getting them on the phone and letting them do that for a brief 5 or 10 minutes. I may not be too comfortable with having them meet in person, but maybe that is the best way to do it as well. Again, I'm here to get the seller the best deal I can, but that being said, sellers are people, and sometimes people's situations, or maybe what the best deal for the seller is to get a fair value and know they're selling it to the right people, meaning someone who's going to take care of that home, create a new family. There might be other motivations for the seller than just price. I found this very important. This was an important lesson for me. I kind of share this briefly, but I had a seller who was facing terminal cancer. Selling and setting up her sister was the number one priority. We could have probably gotten $50,000 to $60,000 more if that was the priority. But a very fast cash 2-week closing deal came in. It was under market. It was under what we thought would be the minimal sale price, more than they thought their property was going to sell for in the first place. They loved it. It was perfect for them. They got out of the situation they were in, were able to free up cash, get the sister into a new home, get the sister established, live together for a couple of years until she passed. It was the right deal for them. So it's not always about price. I have to stress that. And letting the buyer present the situation can sometimes help create that connection that's more important for the seller. We talked a little bit about multiple offers, those call to offer dates, right? Setting a date and time when offers are due so they can all be reviewed at once. If you've got a bunch of offers coming in, this can be the most sane way to handle it. Don't have to. They can be reviewed as received. And again, there's nothing wrong with either one. What's not okay is taking one approach. In other words, taking the call to offers approach and then changing your mind and just reviewing the offers as they're received. That can create a lot of bad blood in the brokerage community or a small community. It can also be considered unethical behavior, especially if the buyer is your buyer. In other words, you're representing both sides, or you're the only agent in the transaction. You may be found to be favoring or potentially acting unethically or illegally. So you got to be careful. Doesn't necessarily mean you are acting unethically or illegally. It just might come across that way and you may have to face some backlash. Again, I'm here to help you guys. So if you come across that situation, that's what I'm here to discuss. But just be aware of the potential issues. And then if you have that call to offer and you get a couple of really good ones, you may go to what's called a final and best. That's where you give the handful or however many offers that already came in an opportunity to come in with their best offer. A lot of times that involves some feedback from you as to the quality of the offers. In a multiple offer situation, it's not uncommon to go to what's called final and best. All right, offers need to be backed by money. In other words, there's no point in looking at an offer if there's no deposit, right? You're certainly not going to have a signed offer without a deposit because it doesn't mean anything. Fundamentals of real estate 101. You've dealt with it in rentals. An application without a deposit is not really worth anything. Just like an offer without a deposit, that earnest money deposit's not worth anything. A deal ticket is due to the office once an offer is accepted within 24 hours. That includes the money, right? The money needs to be with the offer. I need to have that money into escrow within 24 hours or the next business day of receiving it. If we don't, we could have some severe problems. Same thing goes with the escrow deposit. Once the escrow money, right, the money that's received at the purchase and sale, which is typically the larger payment, once that money is received, that needs to get into our escrow account immediately. If you've held that money in your pocket, in a check for a week, we've got a serious problem. That could potentially cause huge liability and maybe a basis for you no longer working with BLP. I say that because it is a very, very serious offense. It is one place that I've seen people get into a lot of trouble. If you get the deposit, that's got to be placed into our escrow immediately. No delays. Contingencies, don't forget to calendar them. Make sure that you're keeping track of that inspection date, the purchase and sale date, that the attorneys are preparing the purchase and sale, right? That the condo docs, meeting minutes, and financials have been given over to the buyer. The purchase and sale is being signed on time. Like I just mentioned, that means that the attorneys are preparing it in advance. That the financing, while we can't go to as the listing agent, as a seller's agent, we're not really supposed to be involved with financing decisions by the buyer. We do want to make sure that those dates when they come up are being met. So it's certainly fine to contact the buyer's agent and ask the buyer's agent, if they've received that, and just a reminder that maybe that date's coming up, but do it in a friendly way, just letting them know that, you're keeping an eye on it. Once they get that commitment, the financing commitment, it is okay for us to get a copy of that commitment. In fact, we should. If there's any other contingencies and dates, you want to make sure you're staying on top of those, right? Don't forget, prepare those to do that smoke inspection. Prepare to do that you have that 6D prepared. Those things take time to plan out. Going back to the purchase and sale briefly, the seller's attorney usually prepares and the buyer's attorney amends the purchase and sale agreement. So the seller's attorney needs to start that process. So it's on us to make sure that seller's attorney is getting the ball rolling. By the way, have the attorneys exchange contact information immediately. Don't sit on that one. Sometimes the attorneys are busy and they can do it today, but they can't do it tomorrow. So we get them the information today, they can get that thing going, get that purchase and sale together. And remember, the buyer coordinates the buyer signing, then transmits the purchase and sale to the seller agent. And the escrow money is almost always, I wrote usually, but almost always due at the purchase and sale signing. And again, that money's got to be transferred to the office. That check has to be given to the office within one day, 24 hours, not more than 24 hours, or the next business day if it's a Sunday. Don't forget to review the purchase and sale. Make sure the sale price is accurate, that the dates are accurate, that our commission is accurate. And you're going to go and make sure like we talked about, the 6D, it's provided by the seller, meaning the seller needs to typically contact the homeowner association and request it. They can give us the ability and an authorization to request it, meaning we can facilitate it. But on either side, and either way you look at it, the seller's side is providing the 6D. That means it's our responsibility. Some buildings take up to 2 weeks to prepare it. It's typically good through the end of the month. However, some homeowners associations limit that to a more restricted time. And again, it says that the association's received all monies due from the seller, from that particular unit owner. That's what a clean 6D says. However, there are dirty 6Ds, which means funds are due. That doesn't necessarily mean that the buyer can't buy or the seller can't sell. It does mean that from the seller's proceeds, from the money due to the seller, that the seller's that those funds are going to be paid out, typically directly by the closing attorney. The closing attorney is either the bank's attorney or the buyer's attorney, not the seller's attorney. Master insurance policy. If it's a condominium, you're going to need to get what's called the master's insurance policy from the association. The association may just provide you with the contact information for the insurance company. They'll just have to request a certificate of liability for the association. Buyer needs us to be able to buy a contents policy. So it's good to have this information in advance. Again, probably one of those things you can get when you're getting the information on the budget and the condo docs and the meeting minutes, right? Just get the contact information or get a copy of the certificate of liability for the master insurance. Get that fire inspection done. It can take up to 21 days to get this done, so plan ahead. Again, they're typically good for 60 to 90 days, depending on the municipality. A big tip here is to keep an extra smoke or carbon detector handy. So if there's a problem, you can resolve it on the spot. When I say handy, show up to that smoke inspection with a plug-in CO2 smoke combo detector. They're expensive. They cost about $50. But if you have it and they need it, you can plug it right in and you don't have to reschedule that inspection. If you don't have it, you're going to have to go get one and reschedule that inspection, and that can delay everything. So plan ahead. This is a helpful kind of tip. Septic systems, the Title V, this has to be scheduled ahead. I mentioned in the introductory video for seller agency, I've actually never done one. So in the Boston area, it's pretty unlikely you're going to have to deal with one. But if you get outside the Boston area, they're very common. But you do need to get that Title V, which is an inspection of the septic system. It says it's not leaching into the ground. It's in good working order. Getting ready for the closing. The seller's going to sign the deed, and what used to be called the HUD still use the HUD typically the cash deal, but the settlement disclosure, the settlement statement with the TILA RESPA, the Truth in Lending Act, and the can't remember what RESPA stands for right now, but with that new regulation, the forms have changed a little bit, but the seller essentially is going to sign the deed and the settlement statement first. That's their portion of the closing. Those documents go into escrow. They're given to the buyer's attorney or the bank's attorney. The bank's attorney has the buyer sign them, and then the funds are accounted for. Everybody's paid out. Don't forget that the HUD, the 6D, the CERN, smoke, the title, whatever is Title V, whatever, all those documents need to be to the buyer's attorney so they can do the closing, or whoever the closing attorney is. There can be up to 3 attorneys in a transaction. You need to know who the one is handling and accounting for everything. Typically, it's the buyer's attorney. The commissions for both agents from escrow deposit, or the commissions for both agents usually come from the escrow deposit, meaning the escrow deposit, if it's 5% and we're collecting 5%, we'll keep that, we'll pay out the cooperating agent, and that money just never goes to the buyer's attorney or the closing attorney. However, if we have more money than that, then let's say we held a 20% escrow deposit, we'll take our 5, transfer the other 15 to the buyer's or closing attorney. Make sure you get the buyer's agent W-9 and invoice. Don't forget, we need that W-9. We have to have that in order to pay them. Get it in advance. And we can't just get that the day of the closing and get a check together and get it out to them. We need a day or two to do our accounting. So try and get that a week in advance. If the buyer agent knows what they're doing, they'll get that to you a week in advance so that their check is ready. But if they don't get that together in advance and they show up with it, they can't be that upset that the check's not ready because they didn't plan ahead. As a good listing agent, don't be shy to help them out and remind them a few days ahead of time. Hey, I need that W-9 and invoice so we can pay you on time. Otherwise, there may be a day or two hold up on getting you your check. And then the check is delivered if it's been handled correctly with the closing documents to the buyer's attorney or the closing attorney, and that's where the buyer's agent will pick up the check from the buyer's attorney. That's typical. It's not the only way. Sometimes if they want to come to our office and grab it, that's fine. Very important. No money can be paid out until the closing attorney, typically the buyer's attorney, but until the closing attorney says we're on record. No commissions can be paid out. Very important. So even though we typically, as responsible, friendly agents, will give each other checks once the documents are all signed, that doesn't mean we're able to deposit those. So there are plenty of situations where closing occurs on Friday at 4 o'clock, but we're not on record till Monday. That means those checks can't be deposited till Monday. That means you can't be paid until at least that Monday, right? Not till we're on record. Also, don't forget about the keys, right? And making sure the seller's moved out. I love this one because I've heard of real life situations where it's happened. Make sure your seller knows they've got to be out unless agreed upon in writing. Make sure the seller knows that their mail needs to be forwarded. So have them, this is a good reminder. This is a value add. Make sure that you've got the keys prepared and to the buyer, and make sure the property is cleaned. Just a basic cleaning, broom swept. You hire a cleaner for $150. He'll be a rock star to the buyer. That way the buyer can show up and move in and they're happy. Don't forget, a lot of times the buyers are moving in the day of the closing. If they're closing at 8 a.m., they're on record at 10 a.m., they're moving in at 2 a.m. or 2 p.m. So just keep that in mind. Prior to the closing, it's not uncommon to do that walkthrough with the buyer and the buyer's agent. You're going to facilitate that. Provide the buyer's contact info to the association. This is just kind of being a nice agent and being a responsible agent. But it is ultimately the buyer's job, but it certainly is helpful that the buyer's contact information is to the homeowners association. That also will make sure that seller's information is taken off of the homeowners association, so the seller's no longer liable for anything. And that's really on the backside, the most important thing is protecting the seller, because that's who our client is. A closing gift to the seller or the buyer is always a nice thing, maybe both. Just reminds them that you appreciate their business. If it's the buyer, there's nothing wrong with saying thank you to them for being a good buyer. And hey, just because they bought with someone else doesn't mean they can't sell with you in the future, right? Building our next business is really the most important thing. We want to make everyone happy so that they choose to work with us in the future. All right, bill outs. Just a brief review on this one. The documents required are the MMLCRD, the listing agreement. Any amendments to that listing agreement are also required. The lead notice, a lead transfer notice, an offer and acceptance form, so the offer that was accepted and the signatures by everybody, purchase and sale agreement, the HUD or the settlement statement. We are getting those now, so that's important to make sure you get those. You also want to make sure you backed up all the documentation into Prospect Converter as a transaction. Again, that's fundamental for billing out. You should know how to do that from a rental standpoint. You're also going to want to watch the sales have a much higher liability behind them. So it's incredibly important that we archive all the emails and communications between us and anybody else related to this transaction. We talk about, there's a video on how to archive the emails. So you're going to want to make sure you archive those emails and then upload that archive in a Prospect Converter. That way, if anything ever came up about he said, she said, we have those emails backed up and we're able to restore them and look at those communications. Don't forget, communicate by email so you protect yourself throughout the transaction. This is incredibly important. And of course, if there were any paper agreements or notes, turn those in and we'll file them away. That way we have all the paper agreements and notes and that have been made, as well as the digital emails that, and we can protect ourselves. And in the event that anyone ever said that we represented something or didn't represent something, or, we don't want to let other people put words in our mouths. We want to protect ourselves. All right, guys, that's an overview of seller agency. So first step, got to go find those sellers. So get on Mojo, get out the door and start door knocking, start calling your friends and family, find out who wants to give you your first listing and sell that house for them. And good luck.